Hello, I'm Sean Plott,
And I'm Tristan Brand.
and welcome to Why We Like It, the show where we talk about any story from any medium and why we think it's awesome.
We are going to
And,
spoil the heck of it, so be warned.
that's actually a good point you bring up because I didn't, I think, emphasize that enough last week until we had already spoiled a lot of Game of Thrones. For any of you
All
who
of the critical points in particular.
Yes, yes, and we will not spoil it in this show, but we will spoil The Hunger Games, which is the topic of the show today, in Why We Like It. In case you have not seen Why We Like It before, welcome, thrilled to have you. In this show, we're going to just explore the storytelling aspects of various story franchises that we like. We've obviously done the Game of Thrones episode last week, talking about both it as a book and a television series. This week we're doing The Hunger Games, both as a book and as the movie. We won't be looking at the second and third in the trilogy. And of course we'll be doing some other even non-book movie type things coming up, such as stories from comics and video games, which I'm really excited about. But yeah, I want to throw it over to you, Tristan, so you can do the intro to this book.
Yes. So yeah, we're going to do the Hunger Games. Trying to tone it back from the dark, gritty world of Game of Thrones, where merely a story about children killing each other in armed combat. I mean, what happier tale awaits us, Sean? Honestly.
Well, somehow it wound up being like one of the most successful young adult franchises in a long time. I mean, just reading about the success the book had, getting 200,000 copies in its first printing, and then eventually 800,000.
Which is insane, by the way.
Yeah, which is
insane.
For any of you who don't know, what is it like having 10, 20,000 books in your first printing sell out is great.
Yes, that would be a success.
And 200,000 is oftentimes larger than 20,000, so
sometimes.
It just erupted as a story. And I mean, even before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about like why that's kind of surprising given its tone.
Mm-hmm. But something that's a question we'll keep in mind, because I think that's interesting, is because this type of story could backfire, where it's just like, yeah, I'm gonna write about kids killing each other, and it's gonna be a young adult market. I'm gonna release it, and people are gonna look at it and go, oh my god, shouldn't you be in jail right now? Because it's a really, it's obviously a very, it's a topic that can invoke a lot of negative emotions for good reason. So the way Suzanne Collin handles that, which characters she chooses to explore, which motivations she chooses to explore, the angle that she approaches it all, I think is really, really important when sort of considering why was this story so successful across so many different markets.
Yeah, and in fact, these among many things are what we're going to be talking about today. So without any further ado, I will happily let you, the viewer, know that basically Tristan and I are just going to talk to each other as we do normally. Tristan, if you'd begin with that idea of resonance, because last week we talked a lot about resonance in Game of Thrones, all the different characters resonate in different ways with different people to sort of draw in, but here you're talking about the reality show aspect.
Sure. So there's sort of, I think the foundation of the Hunger Games in sort of concept comes from two areas, two very, very different areas, although they obviously have this very happy combination. The first is reality shows. Reality shows are like this modern thing that, last 15, 20 years that started becoming very, very popular, almost in the sense where it's like, oh, well, some channels seem to only show reality shows. When Survivor became popular in the year 2000, it just started this basically this pandemic of just reality shows. And, a lot of people like to talk about how much they hate reality shows, and I'm certain they do, but let me tell you, they're talking about reality shows. They are a cultural phenomenon that's very new. It's like, I don't know, I'm sure there are some analogs in earlier times, but they're a very modern cultural phenomenon that, regardless of where you fall in terms of like them, hate them, whatever, they're important to sort of the world we live in.
And it's interesting that, like, also, too, that even the people who hate them and don't like watching them and don't follow them still know all the structure and all the tropes and all the standard mechanics of reality shows. You know, the booth cam where the person goes in and just has an intimate conversation with a camera alone in a room, and all those, all the intentionally putting people together in like romantic drama and all that stuff. It permeates even deeper than like something like video games, where a lot of people well, everyone knows about video games and some about it, but there's still huge subsections of the population that don't know a damn thing about an RPG or a first-person shooter, or be able to tell the difference between them, or could look at a screen and know what is manipulable and not manipulable. But with reality shows, it seems like everyone gets it. Everyone knows it so deeply. So, sorry, I interrupted. Go on, Tristan.
That's a good interjection. So we have this modern concept of the reality show, and then we have this very old concept of the gladiator's arena. Again, I mean, the gladiator's arena comes from Roman times. I'm pretty sure that earlier civilizations than that had similar forms of it. But the idea of forcing people to fight for the entertainment of others, and the others are almost always the ruling class of the times. So in the Romans, you have the rich upper class, the senators, the emperor, and they're watching these gladiators just kill each other, and they're cheering and so on. And the idea of sort of gladiatorial combat is another trope that's just well understood by pretty much everyone. We see it in a lot of other places. We see it in our game shows. American Gladiators doesn't hide the influence in the slightest. We see it in a lot of, and of course, a lot of other stories, television shows, and such. So Suzanne Collin took these sort of two big things and just said, I'm going to put them together. And I don't think she was the first person to do that. I think Battle Royale, it's a Japanese film from, I believe, the 80s. I imagine some people are familiar with that. It's a very similar idea. I'm sure there are other people who just didn't sort of reach that level of success who have done similar things. A lot of times you say in stories that there's no original ideas anymore, which is kind of true. It's mostly just about the implementation. But I think certainly this is one of the sort of probably the most successful implementation of these two ideas thrown together. And I do think that in particular, the reality show part of it, Suzanne Collins really knew what to do with that, and she just really took advantage of all of the things the reality shows have given us and puts it into her story.
Yeah, I like that you bring up the great, awesome, lost my train of thought. It's perfect. It's like, really, that's great. It's my turn to talk. All right, let me talk and straight into a wall. Oh no,
it'll be worth it.
Yes, I'll get there eventually. Well, it's interesting when thinking about, like you said, that a lot of people, I know there was some controversy when Hunger Games came. People, that's been done before, specifically with Battle Royale. But, obviously, like you say, implementation is everything. And in fact, it's more of like a storytelling framework that allows, that's like what you were talking about before, that it's resonance. It's what allows you, the reader, to sit down and begin reading and have a good sense of what's going to go on down the line. And I think that's so important to have. I mean, that's one of the reasons why comic books end up succeeding, where they end up writing they end up writing Spider-Man in a million different instances. They have the Ultimate Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, there's Spider-Man in India, there's the Mary Jane comics that focus largely on the romantic side of things. That when you sit down, even though you open page 1 and you start reading, you have this broader sense of what's going to be going on down the line. And a lot of your question is, how's that going to be filled in? When I started reading Ultimate Spider-Man, I was like, how are they going to deal with the death of Spider-Man's uncle? And likewise, when you start reading The Hunger Games, immediately when the game show thing when they started to introduce it, which they do very, very quickly in the book, the whole notion of it and how it all works, it just instantly, this framework just sort of happens in my mind, where I can just feel this tendril reaching out into the sort of mist of the future story and establishing this this scaffolding for what is to come. And it just makes it so much easier to get into. It was so much more friendly than if I don't know. I'm thinking of the book Ready Player One, which I liked a lot, where it was nice for me. It did create that resonance because I had played a lot of video games and sort of understood that gamic structure that someone who had not read it wouldn't have.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good example. Ready Player One. I know that's not the topic of the show, but as for those who have read it, if you don't know those games, if you don't know the structures of those games and those tropes, Ready Player One is probably a pretty obtuse book to get through. Whereas if you do know it, it's like, oh my god, this was written for me.
Yes,
it's so good.
But I just
we're pitching Ready Player One. Go read it.
Right? Well, I feel like the it's actually funny. I didn't know you'd read that book. That's awesome.
I have a signed copy of that book that I won in Patrick Rothfuss's World Builders Lottery.
Oh my God, you just got so much
I'm a
nerd
lot
street
cooler
cred.
than you.
What?
I
Yes.
don't mean to be rude, but
Well,
I
actually,
just am.
if you actually lean your head out of the way, you can reveal the cat castle that was severely underpriced. That is now the palace for your two cats.
I'm hoping they make an appearance. I'm not gonna lie, because like we can pretend that this show's about us, but it was mostly about my cat's tail.
It's a framework to introduce cats. Well, coming back to the whole game show thing, or the reality show concept, for me, okay, so I just want to say straight up, I love pulpiness. I love pulpy, action-based, really thrillery, pulpy stuff. I don't care if there's a lot of philosophical explorations in the book. I don't care about having extensive symbolism or like a lot of deep any of that stuff. I just like sort of crisp, actiony sort of stuff, and that's one thing that I love so much about the game structure from a functional standpoint. The whole game show structure creates the clearest book structure. I mean, I didn't read The Hunger Games. I listened to the audio book of the Hunger Games probably a year ago. But I still remember it exactly. There is the intro, and then the introduction of what the Hunger Games are, the selection ceremony, going towards the city, the preparation before the games themselves, the wrapping up of the games. I mean, it's just a total straight-up structure. I mean, I'm thinking of the Dresden Files, which is my all-time favorite book series by a tremendous margin. And if we don't do it in this show, well, actually, we're going to do it in this show.
We are going to be doing that.
It's probably next episode. That I know, like, White Knight was probably my favorite. White Knight and Turncoat. I could not tell you specifically what the order of events was in either of those in the way that I can for Hunger Games.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool point.
Yeah, did it.
I think there's something to be said about that sort of that clean structure. I was listening to some writers talk at a panel the other day, and one thing they said is that, well, they were in this critique group, and what they did as a critique group is they took every short story that had been nominated for a Hugo or Nebula Award over the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, and they just read them, and they said, why are these stories winning awards? Like, what is the common element? And I mean, the stories are all completely different. Like, so you can't just say, oh, they're about robots, or they're about, people killing each other, or they're about ponies. What they have in common?
Ponies, yeah.
Ponies killing each other.
I love that made it on the list. That was like I don't even remember what the first two were. I was just nodding and sipping coffee, and Ponies comes out of left field. Right on. I'm here with you. What did they say, Tristan?
They said it's about clarity. They are so clear about what the structure is, what the characters want, what the characters are going to do, what the goals are, and what the obstacles they're going to face. They're like almost clear that sometimes you look at it and you're like, this is too simple. Where is the obscurity? Where is the literary mysticism that's supposed to cloak good books? Where you're sitting there and going, how wonderful as I sip my tea, as I read this 93-page description of the professor's tea party, and I observe the 9-layer symbolism written in Latin that occurs every 5th line. And then I go, oh, Sean, did you catch the reference on page 43? And you say, no, Tristan, I got bored on page 5 and read something awesome.
Yeah, I feel like that cannot be understated. Like,
Yep.
and even if you do rely on an extremely clear structure, the fact that the structure is there means you have so much wiggle room and so much to play with. I'm thinking of like Telltale Games does an amazing job of this, where you sit down to play an episode of the game. They release each game in episodes in the same way that a season of a television series has episodes to it. And in each episode, it very clearly lists what this next 3 hours is going to be. Like, you are been convicted of a crime, and there are these 3 pieces of evidence against you. And you think, oh, well, I guess I have to prove my innocence on these 3 things, and that will be my chunk of time. And you can imagine that in a story. that they say, here's these 3 pieces of evidence. Okay, well then you start doing number 1, and that's pretty straightforward. And then the protagonist goes on to number 2, and that's a little harder. And then proving his innocence on point 3 is nearly impossible. And you're like, oh my gosh, he's finally done it. And then you, boom, surprise, there was a 4th piece of evidence brought in at the last second. So you've created the structure of these 3s, and then you've put in a little twist at the end that would totally make me be like, oh my god, that sucks so much. And you want to read and figure out what happens. And I just love the clarity that falls out so naturally of having it be a game show.
I think to sort of phrase the point you just made in a slightly different way, it's about expectation. By creating a structure that we understand, you can also sort of make really good guesses about what the reader's going to expect, and that lets you put in surprises and twists that are really going to get people. Because if you have them following along with you and like, oh yeah, here's part 1, just like I thought, and then part 2, here's just like I thought, part 3, just like I thought, and then part 4 is a total reversal, and they're just like, holy crap, I was so caught along this line of thinking that this reversal, which might have been fairly obvious if I was thinking objectively, catches me.
Yeah.
And I think there's a few places in the Hunger Games where she takes advantage of that, where it's like you have the expected structure, and then you have a slight twist that strengthens the expected structure and makes the story stronger. I think one good example of this is actually at the start. So you have the story where Katniss is going to go to compete in the Hunger Games. Well, how do you get chosen to be competing in the Hunger Games? You have the reaping. That's a selection process. And, as you pointed out, that's established very early on in the first chapter that the reaping is going to occur.
Yeah.
So you as the reader, you're sitting there, okay, Katniss is going to the Hunger Games, to the reaping, I mean, and she's there with her family, and, she's the food provider of her family, and it's going to be horrible if she has to leave her family and go to these games, and that's clearly the purpose of the book, is she's going to go, so she's going to be selected at the reaping, and that's what I'm going to see. And then she doesn't.
I totally want to interrupt. That it's like a meta point, but it's so important that it's true. That I am reading a book from the point of view of someone named Katniss, and this book would suck if it was about her not going to the Hunger Games and watching it on TV. Wouldn't that book suck? I wouldn't read that. In every romantic comedy I've ever seen, they're gonna get together. With the exception of the movie The Breakup, and even then I was pretty sure that they were still going to get together, right?
Did they get together?
This is a spoiler-free show.
Oh, okay.
Except for the Hunger Games. See how responsible I am today? In all those, it's they're going to get together, and you still just sit there and just let it happen to you. But sorry, I interrupted. Go on. Yeah.
Okay, so you're just yes, she's going to go to the Hunger Games. They're going to select her. It's going to be this really, really touching, heartbreaking scene where she says goodbye to her little sister Primrose and her mother. And then she doesn't get selected. Her sister, who has a single entry in this huge lottery, gets chosen. And Primrose has not been established as a major character. She's just this very nice, quiet, pleasant, younger girl. I'm trying to remember her age. I think I want to say 12, but I'm not 100% certain on that. She's just nice. She's innocent. Those are the important qualities Primrose has. And she gets selected to go in this brutal, horrific, abattoir of death. And suddenly, it's no longer about Katniss going, well, that sucks. I got selected. I have to go do this.
Yeah.
Katniss now gets to make a decision. She gets to decide to save her sister and take her place in the Hunger Games. So her entry has been given a slight twist. But I think it's a really important twist because it establishes something about Katniss's character right from the start, and it gives her some amount of autonomy. Even though she's in this awful, awful situation, this was her choice. This was part of her control. She has control over her destiny. And I think that's a really important sort of theme that lurks around this show is that, Katniss thinks she's sort of doomed through a lot of this, but she's constantly making choices that give her a chance of survival. And I think that's a really interesting way to start it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny to think that from an authorial perspective, you could have been writing this book and had her be chosen without changing anything before or anything after. Just that scene could have just been swapped out. But it's such an important developmental scene for the character of Katniss. Like, it's so difficult to have in a story, or actually when you're writing a story, to not have things happen to the main character, to have the main character drive the action of the story. And certainly in every great story, things do happen to the main character, where he's trying to break into the government facility, and there's only going to be 2 guards, and he gets there, and there's 50 guards. And he's like, oh, shit, how do I end up getting in here, And there's that difficulty. And that there's, like, it's an interesting twist, but it's so easy to fall into that trap of being like, well, Katniss gets sent to the Hunger Games, and she a series of events just sort of happen to her, and then she winds up hiding, and people are dying around her, and she's just still kind of surviving. To give her that proactive role frequently, to give her that opportunity to be proactive frequently, makes the story so much more compelling. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm trying to think of stories where things just sort of happen, and I'm trying to think of an example other than The Hobbit, because I know people will kill me. But that's actually one thing that did sort of disrupt my disrupt me, like, getting really into The Hobbit. Is that it's like things just kept happening to them as opposed to them driving. It's like they were on a journey from A to B, and just like, oh, now there's just trolls. They're just going to try to eat them. Oh, and then they get out of it, and then they're like going through a mountain pass. There's these huge mountain dudes, but they're okay. So then they just sort of keep going, and I mean, it's that need to, like, have the main character push the story, because those moments I think are so key, where you're like, she could stay home, but she doesn't.
Yep. It definitely it also establishes Katniss as a protector of the innocent, or the weaker people. We're talking about resonance. I think it's a good time to bring in, and this didn't strike me as much in the book, although it's there, but it definitely strikes me when watching the movie. Katniss is this female warrior with a bow and arrow, and that's very sort of reminiscent of Artemis, the Greek goddess, who's the huntress. And Artemis has a reputation of being pretty much the only Greek god who doesn't just torture people for the fun of it. I mean, she does that too. But,
of course, she's a god.
Occasionally, she seems to sort of, like, stand up for the weak guy, or at least she's developed that reputation. It's hard to tell, like, how much the Greek myths we actually read resemble the Greek myths that were actually told at the time. And Katniss, as the warrior, the female huntress warrior who sort of steps in and saves the weak, is going to happen. We're going to see this again during the actual Hunger Games segment with Rue, and we just sort of see it, and we see it in a very generic sense with her sort of striking against the capital city and sort of standing up for the districts. I think that's a very powerful image. I think it's one of the reasons that the show, or the book and the movie get so many people. It's like this is a character archetype that's very easy to get behind. And I think what's worth noting is that it's easy to get behind regardless of whether you're male or female. Often when you have a female protagonist, there's this sort of idea of like, oh, well, boys won't read that story. But I think because of the type of character that Katniss is, you get around that problem quite a bit. I think that's going to be very compelling even to male readers, which obviously it ended up being.
Yeah. Given that you and I, for instance, are both male as of the recording of this show.
Wow.
Oh, that's so awesome. What are we talking about? Yeah, But I also love so much from just a functional, organizational story perspective for clarity. Mm-hmm. So much of the important themes are just established really, really early. Like Gale only shows up at the start. And, we were talking a little bit about this before we started recording, that Gale is very clearly established as like, okay, well, he is the one guy who knows about Katniss's secret life and shares this hunter's bond with her.
Yep.
They have a ton in common. They're both from the same district. They're told some love's gonna happen real soon here. And then he literally stops existing
Yep.
quite early in the novel. Same with Primrose. Stops existing quite early in the novel, only via reference from Katniss's point of view.
But they all both end up being fundamental to sort of the tensions and the conflicts that Katniss sort of faces internally,
Yeah.
which is really cool because it's like you can make them throwaway characters, which is just like, oh, these are the characters Katniss interacts with at the start, and then she's in the Hunger Games, and that's that. But I think I think Susan Collins is a really elegant storyteller, and I think this is just another example of her use of that, where she makes really efficient use of her minor characters.
Yes. Oh my
I
god.
like thinking in terms of storytelling efficiency, so.
Oh yeah, I mean
The yield ratio of that character was quite high.
his, yeah, like the thematic use per instance of name ratio, like you compute it like they have on like Yahoo Finance, it's like a debt equity ratio for a character, just churn all that out. I mean,
Numbers. We need more numbers.
yeah,
in
we
our
need numbers.
stories.
Yeah, I think that the real problem people have with books nowadays is they don't have enough data, Tristan.
I absolutely agree.
We come
Start off with a statistical analysis page. That'll really get people reading.
that'll be our show. That'll be our show, is analyzing the numbers, the digits about it. You know,
Sean, let's count the number of uses of the word is.
well,
One.
actually, okay. I actually have a segue. I have a segue. All right. Speaking of word usage in the book, I loved that all the descriptions that Katniss uses are based around food. I mean, Katniss is fundamentally an impoverished, constantly starving person. And a lot of the book is the presentation of this world through the eyes of Katniss. And I've read a lot of books that have world building as an important component to them. And the way it generally takes form is the narrator just happens to copy paste a Wikipedia section of this world there, just like I look north towards Cleveland. In the days when the world was collapsing, Cleveland became a center for blah blah blah, and here's what it is, and it has this exact square dimension footage, and a lot of things are blue there. And then you're like, okay, well, I guess Cleveland's a blue place where there's a lot of poverty sort of on the outskirts, but it's fine, right? And I'm sort of fine with that. That's, it's not a big deal if you do that. It's very common, I actually think, in stories to have that be presented, or even in movies, to just sort of have like the panning view being like, here's what we're working with. All right.
It's called the info dump.
The info dump, yes, right? But Suzanne Collins does this amazing job of saying, okay, well, if Katniss is the narrator, let's put Katniss's identity into all these descriptions. And since she's always thinking about food, because, again, she's always on the verge of starving, and her family's always on the verge of starving to death, what does that mean? And when Katniss sees food in the capital, there's these lavish descriptions of the rich stew with huge chunks of meat and potatoes and the hot buns and the butter and the honey and the spices and the sausage. I mean, I got hungry so many times reading that book. I remember I was listening to the audio. Actually, I was listening to the book. I was listening to the audiobook driving to San Francisco from L.A., and I did like 4 stops at food restaurants. I ate so much that trip because these constant, really visceral descriptions of food. But then from visual perspective, people's qualities in the books are described with food. I think it was Primrose's eyes were described as being the color of rotten mangoes. And every now and again, there was an allusion to them being orangey, but almost everything was like that. This was the color of an old moldy cabbage. But there's also used emotionally, like Peter in the Hunger Games. She said, I didn't want to lose the boy with the bread, because he was the baker back in their district. And just to make that deeply emotional statement as to call him the boy with the bread. Like, I mean, I say that, and I know a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I remember reading that, like, because it was written so frequently in there, and that's just such a brilliant, subtle way to really thrust you in there in a really visceral way, not to just be like, and, being impoverished, it was very hard for me to see all this food. Seriously, I need you to know that, it's not being like slammed in my head. It's just sort of subtly built through this word usage throughout the book.
I think it was really cool because those scenes where she goes, where the Capitol people sort of present her with these just like massive spreads of food, and they talk. And I believe they do this in the movie too, but what strikes me about the food is the visual presentation of it. Just like I can imagine in my head, this just like elaborate, ornate, these pastries and these creams and these colors and these sauces. And what's cool, and this just again just piggybacking along what you said, is that from Katniss' perspective, it's not like, oh, awesome, I've always just eaten moldy bread and rotten deer, and now I get to eat like real people. She's horrified. It's grotesque. She can't even imagine. She's just sitting there thinking, I could feed my family for weeks right now on this food that they're just sort of blithely presenting to me. It's just like, oh yeah, let's have a little brunch and before our lunch and our second lunch and our afternoon tea and our third lunch and our dinner. And she's just like, people are starving to death. Don't you understand? Yeah. And that's such a great way to juxtapose the Capitol and the districts. I'm glad you made that point. I really think that's really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I have not seen the movie of the Hunger Games, but I've seen a lot of the screenshots of like the visuals. Because I was worried when I saw the trailers for the movie that viscerality, is that a word?
It's good enough. It's a word now. Day 9 said it.
Yeah, the
Webster's has to follow.
The visceralitude of it, like I was worried that would be lost when you step out of the first person narrator perspective.
Yep.
That you wouldn't get the sense of how tough it was, but then you just see the visuals and how gross everyone in the Capitol looks, just with these oddly colored like hair and skin and like
it looks like plastic. They look like figurines.
Yeah, it's like that uncanny valley.
Yep.
That for you who aren't familiar, the uncanny valley is the idea that it's a graph of how comfortable you are with a character versus how human it looks. So if you start with something that looks not quite human but kind of has some traits of it, we feel okay about it. Think of the characters in Toy Story. Think of, like the dinosaur in Toy Story that kind of has the little arms and little face and kind of smiles and he's doofy. Like, you love that dinosaur. I don't remember his name, but I love him with all my heart. And the more you get towards human, the more it's kind of like, ugh. Like, think of, the plastic look of the characters in Hunger Games. Or, like, a zombie. Or someone whose skin looks really pale with black lips. Who's not moving. There's that sort of, like, corpse-like look that a lot of weird creatures have in monster films. Like, that's the uncanny valley. It's that valley right there where you're just like, ugh. And that's one of the reasons why animators like Pixar tend not to have really hyper-realistic looking human faces like they had in Final Fantasy Spirits Within. They tend to have it a little bit more on the cartoony side because it's more relatable. And only once you get really hyper-accurately human does it flip again and you start being able to relate to it. And just that visual use of that was like so crisp.
Yeah, it's disconcerting. Like when you see the people in the Capitol in the movie, you're just like, ugh. It's just like it's off. And I think that's the way they carried that tone. Like in the movie, there's this shot of one of the other districts. I think of Ruse District, which I believe is 9. I think it's 7. No, 11. Whatever, Ruse District. And the people in Ruse District look normal. They look like regular people. It's like one of the few shots in the film where it's just like, oh, those are just regular people. They're working class people. They're dirty and they're smudged and they're in kind of poor clothes, but they look very, very normal as opposed to the crazy creepiness of the Capitol. And my favorite scene in the movie, and this is one of my favorite scenes in the book too, so I love that they pulled this off, is the reaping. That's where the selection ceremony is. And that's when the woman, what's her name? Her last name's Trinket. What's her first name? It's like, begins with an E.
Oh, gosh. This is what I'm telling you. We're going to nail everything. And then right when it's like my favorite scene in the movie is like, I don't know, Eleanor, Trinket. The internet knows. Let me just look it up.
Bequeath us with our knowledge, Lord Internet.
What is it? It's Hunger Games Trinket was her last name?
Yeah.
Effie Trinket.
Effie Trinket.
Thanks,
That's
Internet.
a weird name. So you're in District 12, which in the color tone is kind of muted, but fairly normal looking people. Again, they're definitely dressed kind of poorly. I think Primrose is in like a nice blue dress, and Katniss is in an I think she's wearing. I want to say she's wearing a white dress, but that might be incorrect. And then Effie Trinket comes on stage, and she is again she's dressed up like a doll. And she's got pink hair, and it's just like she's so fake, and the look of the people looking at her, and it's just like what's going on? It's like it's almost like, is this a joke? Except the backdrop is so deathly serious. It's like two families are going to lose their children, and since it's District 12 and they hardly ever win, they're going to die. And they're going to die horribly. And you have this clown, basically, this clownish woman who's like sitting there just like, hello, everyone. Are you ready for the Hunger Games? Oh, it's so wonderful. I know you're all so very excited. Let's see who the lucky people are. And she's like, she seems to be genuinely into it. Like, this is like a happy ceremony time. And the people are just sort of dumbstruck by it. Just like, what, how can you be like that?
Yeah.
And that scene, like, it's almost heartbreaking, where it's just like, because it's like if a big bad guy came on, just like, look, District 12, I'm Mr. Evil, and I've got the mustache to prove it, and I'm gonna pound my fists, and I'm gonna, laugh maniacally, and I'm gonna pick two, happy little children, and I'm gonna drag them off, and we're gonna kill them. It's like, at least you can go, yeah. It's like, yeah, that's the bad guy, that's the boogeyman. We can fight against that. But when the boogeyman is Effie Trinket, it's almost confusing. You don't know quite what to do with it. You don't know what to do with her because, as screwed up as it all is, she's not really evil.
Yeah.
And I actually like the character of Effie Trinket. I think she's a fascinating character, and I think you could have taken the easy way out and just made her a straight up bad guy. It's like, oh, she's the oblivious lady who runs the Hunger Games and, sort of callously leads these children to their death. But what you start to realize about her is how clueless she is.
Yeah.
Like, literally clueless. And you get glimpses of her getting a clue. And I think if you sort of, the book doesn't really do this, but this is the type of thing I do when I'm reading. If you sort of twist things and you suddenly imagine this through the eyes of Effie Trinket, you think you're the good guy. You think you're doing the right thing. You think you do your job well, and that you try really hard, and that, you're basically doing a great thing. And then it's sort of like suddenly reality shifts, and you see something that you thought was good and wonderful turned into something monstrous. And it's like the revelation of truth.
Yeah,
and that's devastating. I think that's a really, and I know this moment doesn't really, because of course she's not a viewpoint character, but to me that's a really powerful idea in the book, even though it's kind of minor.
Yeah, well, it's like what you were talking about earlier with like the efficiency of characters. Yeah. That I feel like very often you will have some group that represents like an organization. Like the Capitol. What is the Capitol? Well, it's this idea that there's a whole bunch of people here who have this sort of similar set of beliefs about decadence and the fun and joy of the Hunger Games when it's really awful. And very often you'll have a character who's from that organization, and they will revile against it, and it'll be an example of the sort of redemptive arc of that group. But like, kind of like you're saying with Effie Trinket, it's interesting that she's like such a pure, simple way to represent all the views of the Capitol without having to spend a lot of time on it. Because often when you separate those into two, like, here's what the Capitol is, and here's how Effie Trinket resists that. And back to describing the Capitol and the ways of the Capitol and people there, and here's Effie Trinket. The fact that it's just merged all into one character is like so efficient. And I think maybe I guess you could argue that Cinna,
but he's a different representation. Like, Cinna is clearly sort of, Cinna is like not quite the same as the rest of the Capitol people. Like, the way he's introduced, the way he talks, you immediately identify Cinna as a potential ally and someone who somehow doesn't buy in 100% to the Capitol.
Yeah, and what I like so much is very often stories will have a Cinna character without an Effie Trinket character.
Yep.
And I just love the way to just have both of those in there, because it's so easy to have a Cinna character and not have an Effie Trinket character, and then to have Cinna say something, and then there's the monologue of narration explaining why that contrasts. And then Cinna will say another thing, and then the monologue of why that contrasts and why he's different. But now you can have Cinna talk to Effie, and in a much more functionally natural way, you're getting to hear the viewpoint of the Capitol laid side by side with the viewpoint of someone who's not really buying into the Capitol.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
So, I think we should move into the actual games itself.
Actual slaughtering and murder of
I think
children.
it would be a tragedy if we did this episode without talking about the wholesale slaughter of innocent people.
Yeah, I want to start off with the slaughter by talking about Mark Rosewater, who is the...
Exactly the association he is looking for.
Great, yeah. Mark Rosewater, the lead designer of Magic the Gathering, has this great design blog where he talks about Magic, and there was this one where he talks about 10 things that all games should have. And one of the points he has in there is momentum. That a game should have something that constantly propels it towards the conclusion. So this would be like in a football game, where there is a timer, and you know that when that timer elapses, the game is actually done. Or in chess, where, if you're playing a game that's untimed, it still has that momentum that if I capture one of your pieces, then I am in a better position to be able to capture more pieces. So then that means that it starts building and driving towards the conclusion. And I love the fact that in this sequence where... in the Hunger Games, it says it's 24 and it goes down to 1. Few things are easier to understand than a countdown. Exactly like we have in sports. Now it's 24 children down to 1 child. And they have the cannon that blasts off at midnight that shows how many are left. And from the... so the word diegetic means diegetic is this totally rad word. I strongly encourage you to use it. Diegetic is stuff that the characters in the story can experience. So like if you are like watching The Matrix and there's a rad techno soundtrack playing during a battle sequence, that is not diegetic music because the characters in the movie can't hear that. But if they like walk into a tavern and there's techno playing, or like in the club in The Matrix when they're in the club and there's that music playing in the club, that's diegetic music. So like diegetically, you'd say that the reason the cannon goes off is to let the characters, or to let the tributes in the Hunger Games know what their current standing is. So it makes sense there. But then from the like me as a reader perspective, I know like, oh, what is it? 7 are left. Wow, we're getting close to the end. There's only 5 left. Oh my God, how's that one girl doing who got shot in the neck with an arrow and who like slunk off? Oh, the cannon went off. She must be dead. Like there's all those things that help building you towards that conclusion. And kind of like we were saying earlier, if you build that expectation, you can break it. So yeah, when you're getting down to like 4, 3, 2, 1, you expect that there's going to be a culminating final battle among children. And instead these like wolves, these odd wolf beasts come in. And there are just more things that need to be killed. Yep. And it's just like a really nice twist element.
Yep. Yeah, I think that the there's a couple interesting elements that are happening with the game segment, and I think we do need to just back up a little bit and talk about PETA, who we have not spoken about yet, because he's really really crucial to the arc of this book. So we talked about Gale. Gale is the romantic interest. He's going to he's the strong guy who, as we pointed out, Katniss clearly has a romantic interest in. PETA is the boy with the bread who did not give her family, who like when she begged him for bread, he like threw it in a puddle. So she like already hates him, and she has to go to the Hunger Games with him. And they realize early on that they need to sort of fake a romance. Like that's really important story wise. It like in terms of the show, the Hunger Games as a reality show, it's going to give them it's going to give them basically credibility, and it's going to allow them to get sponsors. So sponsors are this thing where basically people are watching the show. If they're rich, they can like give money to the show and have like helpful items brought to the contestants. And one of the reasons that people from District 12 basically never win is that they never get sponsors. The sponsors tend to go to like Districts 1 and 2, which have like these academies where the people learn how to fight, and they almost always win. So by PETA and Katniss sort of faking that they've been in love, you suddenly have this storyline within the Hunger Games where people who are watching it are like, ooh, Katniss and PETA, lovers forced to kill each other, and choose between love and death. Yeah, I can get behind that. I'll give them money. So that because the viewers are gonna be like, oh, I want them to survive till the end. Because what better entertainment than to watch two lovers forced to decide who dies and who lives, right? I mean, that's just the most wonderful thing in the world when you're a Hunger Games potential sponsor. So you have this fake romance with PETA, and that there's a lot of internal conflict with that because, of course, Katniss wants to be with Gale, right? She doesn't want to be with stupid PETA with his bread, and they. So you have this
stupid PETA with his bread. Oh, that's so awesome. Hunger Games insults.
I think that's kind of what Katniss is thinking too. She's like, I don't think she actually says that, but the impression I get from Katniss is she's like, oh, stupid PETA.
Yeah.
He's so annoying. Of course, she slowly falls in love with him, but it's not a love triangle if that doesn't happen, right?
Yes.
So I think the interaction between sort of Katniss and PETA during the game segment and even during the pregame segment is really interesting, where there's a lot of sort of up and down, where they're getting along and then they're mad at each other. Like at one point when they're preparing for the games, PETA sort of asks for separate training sessions, and Katniss is really hurt by this, and she's like, "Wait, what? I thought we were in this together." And then in the actual game, Katniss and PETA get separated quite early, and then PETA ends up joining with the District 1 and 2 people. So Cato is like the main antagonist during the game segment. Yeah. Cato in the other District 1 and 2, there's a group of 4 of them to start off with, and they drag along PETA. And so Katniss is like, oh, wait, is PETA still my ally, or is he actually in with them? She's actually not sure. And then, of course, PETA ends up helping her, betraying the people he's with and helping her again.
Yeah.
So you sort of have that arc that's kind of winding its way through the game segment. And that arc is a lot stronger because of because of Gale, even though Gale is no longer part of this story. And I think that's nice because I don't read romances. I'm not interested in reading romances. In fact, when you tell me a story has a strong romantic subplot, I'm like, ugh.
you have to endure it to get to the rest. Yeah. It's like
Yep.
It's like in the hardcore Japanese RPG where you have to grind through really long boss battles
Yep.
just to get a little more story.
I'm just like, come on, kiss her and get to the battle scene.
Yeah.
Like, no, don't interrupt the battle scene.
I love the idea of you grinding romance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just grind the romance parts to get to the battles.
I can make a lot of comments about Wheel of Time right now, but maybe I'll save those for another time. Here, I'll make a comment. For those who do Wheel of Time, Perrin and Fael, or however the heck you pronounce her name. I will say nothing more. If you know Wheel of Time, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, back to the Hunger Games. I liked the romantic arcs in the Hunger Games. I thought they were effective. I thought they were interesting. I thought they were unexpected, and I didn't think they were annoying. Like, that's for me, and I mean, that's just me, but like a lot of times romantic arcs get annoying. It's about someone pining away for the other person. It's like, oh, I love them, but they don't like me, or they slighted me for some stupid, like, ridiculous reason that no reasonable person could possibly be worried about. But the conflicts that Katniss goes through with both Gale and PETA, I think are very realistic and very reasonable. And I understand the sort of difference in perspectives that lead to their various spats and sort of their uncertainty. She gets put in this really tough situation where it's like, okay, I have to fake this romance with this guy, and then I start to like him. But it's not so easy where it's just like PETA sitting there with fawning brown eyes, where it's like, Katniss, come to me. It's not clear if he likes her.
And I love the fact of like, it's that efficiency that you were talking about earlier. That like all these are layered on top of each other. I mean, it's a fact that I'm about to share. It's gonna be very hard to have shared. In browsing fanfic of various sorts, especially the low quality fanfic, which has got to be my favorite thing to do in the entire universe. There's a lot of great Tumblrs that like suggest awful fanfic, and I just gobble them up.
Nice.
That there's a lot of just having alternation of stuff. Like there's a romance subplot, and then there's a sort of action plot, and then the action stops, and then the romance starts for a little bit, and then it stops, and it goes back to the action. And it's just so efficient the way it's all just neatly layered on top of itself. That again, because it's this game show, the reality show setup, you know what it means to fake a relationship in order to get ahead. You can clearly see why they'd want to do that from the action point of view, and then it's like totally conflated with the actual romance.
Right.
And that's like really interesting to sort of like see that like driftingness. And it doesn't cause that impatience. And I'm sure everyone's had that experience with a story where there's, I don't know, let's say 4 or 5 subplots within the major plot, and 1 or 2 of them you just don't care about at all.
Mm-hmm.
There's some whiny character who's upset because his dad's missing, and you're like, I hope the dad's dead. Just kill it out, kill him, and let's move on. Anything with this whiner. But I very much so had the feeling while reading The Hunger Games where I personally didn't care that much for the romance. I have no emotional tie to Peter or Gale or Katniss. Like I don't really want any particular pairing. Although I totally think Gale got screwed, and I think that sucks, and I feel for him. But I don't really want any particular pairing to happen. But while reading it, I still had that feeling of like, well, at least this is simultaneously driving forward this broader experience of what's actually going on in the Hunger Games.
Yep.
I love that. I love that awesome efficiency of stuff going on, where every single character and every single interaction is exactly what it needs to be. It's like what you were saying with Primrose. Primrose is there to not just establish who's back home, but also to create that cool decision point. I even like Kato. How Kato's actually really one-dimensional. He just, like, comes in, is a asshole, and he's just like, I'm gonna kill everyone. And then he goes around and he kills everyone until he stops because he's dead. And there's, like, a sentence there that's like, by the way, this is a little boy.
Yeah.
So don't be too
or teenager,
happy.
But yeah.
Yeah. I like little boy because it's just it sounds much more pathetic than little teenager. Most people want teenagers to just have horrible things happen to them, but like seriously, but like it's just like, oh yeah, like that's literally, there's like the 2 sentences of sympathy and the rest is like totally one dimensional. And I don't think any more dimensionality would have made him any better. I think it was a perfect amount of stuff thrown in there.
Yeah. Well, I think the just expand slightly on the point where Kato dies, and it's like the last thing Kato sort of says or recognizes is that he was bred to do this. Like, he's not even a real, he understands he's not even a real human being. He was a guy who was brought up to kill, and then he killed, and now he's gone. And that's another little example of something very tragic happening to a very one-dimensional minor character. That I think, a lot of authors might not have put in. It's just like, you don't need, that doesn't, the story doesn't change if you remove that and just have Kato be like, I will never, I regret nothing as he dies, right? As he gets torn apart by the wolves resembling his fallen companions. Not high on my list of ways to die.
Dude, that's how I'm gonna go, 100%.
But that's good. I mean, I guess, stylistic difference of opinion.
That's cool. Yeah, I want some unbelievably epic death.
What we're talking about, some of the other side characters, I really want to make sure we mention Rue. I love the character of Rue. Because I like how she starts off. It's just like, she gets mentioned at the start. She's like this tiny little, like, elfin girl, right? the youngest camp person there. She's small, and she's like you get introduced to her, and like not only are the other characters' responses, but you as the reader, you're just like, holy shit, she is screwed.
Yeah, yeah.
Like she's the deadest of the dead right now. Um, and then it's like later on when they're like rating the contestants, Rue, like there's just like this little one sentence mention, like Rue gets a 9, which is pretty high. And
It's
you're
a
just
great
like,
number.
huh. Well, that's interesting. I thought she was dead. Like, what's she doing? Is she like this? Is she like this little psychopath that like smiles at you and then shows you her doll and then like eviscerates you with a claw-like hand? I'm trying to think of some crazy '80s horror movie.
Well, I love the way that mystery is held.
Yep.
Because I feel like there's not enough emphasis put on how like awesome any amount of mystery is in any story, even a non-mystery story. Where if you just create a little bit of mystique about something, like you said, it's so simple. It's like Rue gets a 9, and it kind of gives you that, and there's so much stuff with just nice use of numbers to create very simple expectations. Like the 24 down to 1 contestants in the Hunger Games. The fact that you each have 1 ticket put into the reaping, unless you need more supplies, and then you can put extra instances of your number in that makes it even more unlikely that Primrose was chosen to really bring the shock. The number rating of the judges, where you get the sense of, wow, 9's pretty good, and like some of the tributes like the career tributes getting scores comparable to Prim or to Rue. You're just like, oh, I love how simply that's done, and just making her eyes have that glint to them.
Yep. Yeah, I think Rue's a great character. In the movie, and I didn't get this quite as much in the book, but in the movie, she's very much portrayed as this like, as someone who was analyzing it in the workshop I went to said, she's like a forest creature, and heroes are helped in fantasy novels by mysterious forest creatures like fairies and imps and pixies. And Rue is like a pixie. She's just like, she's in the woods. She's hidden in the branches. And right in a really critical moment for Katniss, which is right after she's been stung by those horrible wasps, which is one of those places in the book where I was just like, oh god.
Oh, tracker jackers.
I can imagine that. Yeah, the trackers. Oh my god. And Rue helps Katniss sort of like, figure out like what paste or whatever to put on the wounds. Or maybe she doesn't help her with the paste. I think maybe she points out the tracker jackers, and then Katniss uses them to throw onto one of the District 2 girls, who then dies from being stung to death by thousands of hideously painful wasps.
Dude, that's how I'm gonna go.
Jeez, I hope not.
You get stung
That's
by
way
the
worse
wasp.
than all the other ones.
Yeah, that was. I hate bugs.
When I was tiny, me and my brother, when I was like 3, me and my brother got walked into a wasp's nest, and I think I got stung like 14 times, and he got stung like 20 times. It's not fun. It's a good thing we weren't allergic.
It's a good thing you are not a tribute, Tristan.
Yeah. I would not be the greatest tribute. For all of my pretensions of being a badass and awesome at games, I don't really want to be in the woods with a weapon and having to kill people. Especially when those people are your friends. And I want to just, we talked about the ticking clock. One of the sort of horror elements that makes this so compelling is 24 to 1, and 2 of those people are Peeta and Rue. Means if Katniss wins, which you kind of know she has to, it's the plot of the story, those people are going to die, and what happens if those are the ones left? It's like they have to kill each other. Like that's the horrible Machiavellian sort of thing this is going to lead to.
I love rules in stories, dude. I love rules so much. I mean, maybe it's the fact that I'm a gamer, as you can tell by the StarCraft shirt I'm wearing and the StarCraft post and Diablo poster, and there's StarCraft like everywhere behind me. Like, I love rule-based stuff. Like
you should be Sanderson, dude. all his magic systems are so rule based.
Dude,
So
I want to read Way of Kings. I love this.
it's the magic system in the Mistborn trilogy. You will just like
Look,
you will sob over the.
for the record, everyone should read this book, Legion. I read the whole thing by Brandon Sanderson. It's stupid good. I hate like the binding, so I just throw it out always. So I just have like a lot of really plain books.
You did read.
What?
You did read that.
Yeah, I loved it. It's great. We should talk about it after the show. This is such a clever book. But yeah, I just have rules. It's just like such an easy thing to do to be like, you cannot just something as simple as like imagine a story where it's a normal city in sort of a noir Chicago-esque setting, and there's a special rule that absolutely no one can be out of their house after 9 p.m. Like I'm just arbitrarily stating that rule because that's a rule I had when I was really young, and I used to just want to go biking and playing outside. My mom was like, just no, not till 9 p.m. What if like, the entire city couldn't go out until 9 p.m.? There's a mystery, and then when you like break the rule, there's oh geez, like they're outside. It's 9:15. He's gonna get killed. You like don't know what's up, and the way that there's just so much to reveal, like the drama that happens when you get spotted, why it's there, who enforces this rule, all the presenting and breaking of rule. I love it. I don't remember what you were talking about beforehand. I just like rules.
Rules are pretty sweet.
God, I love rules. Rules are the.
And this is definitely, just going. I mean, we've said this 40,000 times, but I think I'm going to keep repeating it. The clarity of the rules and the structure let this make this story so strong. And I don't think it's like a hard, fast thing that every good story has to have like clearly set rules. But man, I think it makes it hard. And I'm thinking of some of my favorite stories in fantasy novels where the rules are really unclear and vague. And the one that comes to mind is the Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson, which I love. It is hard to read. It's hard to recommend. A lot of people who start it do not get anywhere. It takes an immense amount of effort on the reader's end to even follow like simple okay, what is this character even trying to do? If you can even remember the name. But I think it works. Like it's a lot. Like I got so into some of those books, like as complicated and as obscure as it is. So it does work without the rules, but it's a lot harder. You run the risk of losing people a lot more, and having hard, fast rules gives you, as you pointed out, flexibility. It lets you, and it gives you so many openings, as you pointed out. If you have rules, what happens when you break them? That's such a simple idea. That generates a story. It generates a story, and it's really, really cool.
There's one thing that I wanted to talk about before we end up wrapping up this show. And that's that, for the most part, I wanted Katniss to die. I got frustrated with Katniss, and I this is where I like. I just want to know, I very much so have not. I don't want to say not strong opinions, because I would say that I like to think through why I believe certain things about like stories I like and that sort of thing. But like I'm very happy to give up any opinion I have on any story. So I'm about to say I'm not even sure I agree with so much. It's like Sin City, which is my literal favorite movie. It's number one, right at the top. When I watched it at the time, I didn't actually like it that much. Because I went there because I took a girl on a date, and I didn't know that much about Sin City. I was like, "You want to go see this movie?" And we went, and she freaked out, and I was like, "Oh my god, she's not gonna like me!" And that polluted my enjoyment of the movie. And then when I was by myself, I was like, "No, that movie was awesome, and I shouldn't date this girl if she doesn't like it." But I listened to the audiobook of The Hunger Games, which is a really weird experience because they read in this very slow, plodding fashion. It's not at all at a talking pace. It's very much so like Katniss Everdeen slipped underneath the grate to get outside of the great walls of District 12.
Okay, now I hate her too.
Look, okay, that's how it's written, and when you're reading, it's interesting that in a movie there is a fixed pacing. Mm-hmm. No one will watch that movie slower or faster than you will watch it. You will consume it at the exact same speed. Games have fixed pacing, but dynamic content. You can maybe, visit 2 cities in Skyrim that I didn't visit, but if we visit them, we'll still move at the same speeds. We still have the same constraints imposed on us by the game. But with a book, weirdly, you have variable pacing. Or variable consumption rate, where like if I open up a book and I'm reading, in description settings I tend to read slow, but then when I get to exciting things, I'm reading much, much, much faster. And that was hard. That's always hard for me with any audiobook, especially Jack Reacher, which I like Jack Reacher, but it's kind of weird to listen to him brutally torture someone with a slow, bland voice kind of plodding through it. And I hated Katniss in a lot of circumstances because I felt like she too often was trying to convince me that what was obviously going to happen wasn't going to happen. I specifically remember the sequence where it's the judges giving you the score of 1 to 12 on your task thing. And she shoots the arrow at the judges through the apple in the boar's mouth and leaves. And there must have been 15 to 20 pages. It was certainly like 30 minutes of this 14-hour audiobook of Katniss thinking mentally about how poor of a score she was going to get. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't like the romance with Peeta, where, she's romancing with Peeta, and even if you don't care about the romance, at least it's driving forward the Hunger Games storyline itself. It was just internal monologue of, there's no way that I was ever going to get higher than a 2, maybe a 3. And just going on and on and on. It's like, and then I knew that after District 11, that only meant that District 12 was left. And that would mean that everyone in the whole district would know that I would do poorly, and laugh they would. Laugh and laugh at how poor my score was. And I'm like, fuck, Katniss! Just shut up and just watch the TV. And then she gets an 11, and then she says, she's like, an 11? There must have been something that was going wrong for there to have been an 11. And I actually want her to die because, like going into that sequence, I feel like there's one of 2 things that I as a reader kind of would have expected to happen. One would be that she is convinced she's going to nail it, but she doesn't. Right? She does this amazing job of shooting, and she's like, haha, I did amazing. And then the tributes get 11s, and she gets a 5, and she's like, oh my god, if I got a 5 when I nailed it, who are these tributes? And it builds tension. Or it was going to be kind of what happened, where she thinks she messed up and then she gets a good score. But then there was 30 freaking minutes, there's pages and pages and pages of her trying to convince me that that's not gonna happen. And I was like, no, it's just stop it. And, or like with Peeta, how it's like, he leaned in to kiss me, and I knew that it was not a real kiss, but it was something that I would have to do in order to win. And I'd be fine if she said that once, but it was like 100th time that she had said that exact, or she'd had that exact thought, and I was like, I don't want to listen to you say it again. I get it. I don't know. I got very, very fed up with having her in the first person narration standpoint just try to tell me what wasn't going to happen, and then it would just happen. It felt like vacuous narration, which I guess it doesn't really matter because the whole book was just so crisply, cleanly, elegantly executed for me to really gripe on Katniss. I don't know, but I still
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to hear you talk about that, and especially the way you perceive the audiobook. I haven't listened to an audiobook since I was probably 10.
Well, it's not that outdated. You have to say it like that. It's like,
I live in the modern world, Sean.
It's like, what do you have, an iPhone 1? I only listened to audiobooks when I was 10.
No, it's just I don't listen to them. I'm just not in a situation where they'd be useful, and I think they would annoy me for the reasons you just stated. I read very dynamically. I read very, very quickly, sometimes a little slowly at other times. And if you take that away from me, I think I would just get frustrated. And the second I recommended Jack Reacher to you, and then you told me you were listening to an audiobook, I was like, ooh, I'm not sure it's going to translate so well because it's got this very sparse staccato prose. I love reading it. I love the way it looks on the page.
Dude,
I like the way
it sounds good. I actually like it a lot as an audiobook.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. But like the idea of someone sort of dryly reading it, I could definitely say it's like, well, that might take away the sort of awesomeness of Jack Reacher.
Dude, I will say.
By the way, we need to do Jack Reacher on an episode.
Dude,
I declare.
That movie has got to be one of my favorite movies of 2012.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna screw. I'm gonna say 2013 because that's the year we're in now, and it came out of the. It's like one of my favorite movies of 2013. It was really funny to listen to Jack Reacher on audiobook because it's like he's sitting in the back of a cop car, and then he'll say something like, "Did you check his pockets in the evidence room?" He turned around. He leaned his shoulder over the chair. The chair squeaked. Looked me in the eyes. Nope, didn't do that. He turned back around. Put his hands on the steering wheel. He kept driving. Like, it's like every little single thing that's going on gets noted with these very, like, medically sterile sentences. And it's just
It's cool.
I love that thing. But, like, what are your thoughts about my Katniss statement? About my, like, deep hatred for Katniss as a human?
I mean, it's just an interesting way of, like, what are we buying into her motivations? I did not, like, going to that scene where she's shooting at the judges, I didn't have trouble. I sort of was with her. I was like, okay, are they going to, like, again, these people are being demonstrated as, like, really superficial, not, they're not on the side of the contestants. Katniss just showed defiance, right? Yeah, maybe that'll go well for her, but, like, maybe they'll be like, what does this girl think she is? She's some upstart. She's screwing with our games. Let's punish her. So I thought it was a reasonable story path for them to punish her for what she did. Like even on the meta level, I thought that it was totally acceptable for her to do poorly. I thought on the sort of level of what Katniss should be reasonably thinking, I thought it was fair that she was worried. Again, she's like, okay, she's pretty good with the bow, but she's self-taught. She knows she's competing against these District 1 and 2 people who have trained their entire lives for this moment. If I'm in her shoes, I don't think I have a chance. I think it's like I'm this gold StarCraft player, and it's like, hey, Tristan, here are your two buddies. They're both in Grandmaster, and I'm just like, well, I could have the game of my life, and I'm still going to look like a complete moron, right? So I thought that was pretty reasonable on sort of both the meta level and the in-story level. But it's a really thin line between sort of, I bought into this and I think it's credible, and I'm just not buying this at all. I think it just comes down to preference and how much you're sort of in the character's head, and I think it's cool. I think it's just interesting that we sort of perceive that so differently.
Well, I mean, you make such a great point, and interestingly, I can simultaneously agree with what you said and still want Katniss to die. Isn't that interesting? That I can still want this simultaneously? Well,
I mean, I'm right, of course. But...
Well, no, that's fine. No, I'll embrace being wrong. I've been wrong before. Like, when I first saw Prometheus, I was like, oh, why? It was a little too jarring for me. And now I'm like, oh, it was actually pretty rad. Actually, I will say that on a general note, the one thing that tends to make me be like, oh, what? With stories and tends to cause me to like not get into them as much is that feeling of like of jarringness. Anytime I am self-aware that I'm watching, that for me is like real hard. That's been the consistent thing I've seen in stories that I get like real critical of. Like, if I'm watching a movie and someone's dead, and then all of a sudden 30 minutes later they're not dead, and it's like, hello Steven, I was never dead all along. If it's not elegantly presented, I get that, wait, what the fuck? Like, I get that, what? And when that happens, I'm just like, oh gosh. So I mean, I remember like listening and I was like, oh yeah, she's really upset. She's still upset. Wow. I mean, God, I've been on the 5 highway for like 4 hours now. I'm almost off. I'm almost to Gilroy, and she's still talking about it. Would she shut? Like, the fact that I'm like aware of geographically where I have been when she starts this whole discussion. It's like those things that really sort of. But what's also impressive to me is that I can still enjoy that story so much. Like, every story is gonna have things that cause friction. It would be dumb for me to be like, oh yeah, Suzanne Collin, if she just doesn't know. That would literally be the dumbest thing that I could do. Right? Where should I know? Like, it was awesome. Like, I listened to it. I I hate getting gas in my car. My car is empty. Like, it can break down in my driveway tonight. And, like, because it's so low on gas. Because I just hate doing it. I would go to the gas station to fill up my car when it was a half tank, just so I could listen to, like, another 15 minutes of the Hunger Games. I would drive to a far away gas station because it was excellent. And it's interesting that you can have a story that will not please everyone all the time, yet overall I'm like, God, it was great. And it was it sounds on paper like a big deal. Sean didn't like the main character. Sean wished death upon the main. I seriously wanted her to just be one of the kids that got slaughtered right at the opening. She looks for the bow and she's like, I can get it. And she grabs it and just a sword goes through her head and that's the end of the book. I'd be like, yes!
The sword like falls from the sky and there's like no explanation whatsoever.
Yeah, it goes down through her head. So like her brain gets like cut in half and she's a little bit aware before she dies. I would be like, God, I hope someone got the movie rights to this. Like, I can't wait to know the CG of the sword going down. Oh, the angle. It's amazing to me that with just me thinking that the main character is a little bit overly wordy and panics too much about stuff she shouldn't.
Yeah.
Even with that, I'm like, crisp, excellent book.
Sweet.
Done.
Well,
any closing thoughts, Tristan?
It's just a great book. It's interesting. It's beyond the scope of this show, but I think it's very interesting to watch the structure of the story as it goes into books 2 and 3. For those who have read it, I think if we do sort of sequel episodes to this, I think there's a lot to say, especially about book 3. It's just a really clean, elegant, well done, entertaining story that I just really loved. Through and through.
Yeah, it's almost the I love Hunger Games for the opposite reason that I love Game of Thrones. For Game of Thrones, it's the complexity in the way that there's these seemingly impossible to weave together disparate storylines that George R. R. Martin does weave together excellently. Like that's that in the spectrum. And on this end of the spectrum with the Hunger Games, it's like such a clear, straightforward, simple, like just simple execution of an idea that resonates with a lot of people that's executed just brilliantly. I just so impressed with the clarity. I love clarity so much.
Clarity. If you don't get anything else from this episode, Tristan and Sean love clarity.
Clarity! Yeah! Math majors unite! Oh, dude. What did you let X equal? Oh.
I know we could do a whole show about like why we love algebra, except it'd have to be like 6 hours long. And we would have -10 viewers.
Dude, that would be so awesome. And we'd begin all our sentences with consider or suppose. God, that's funny if you majored in
I actually would enjoy doing that show. Yeah. Just so the world understands, I would enjoy spending 6 hours talking about algebra with Sean.
I would love to do one on combinatorics. Seriously, man.
Graph theory, dude.
Dude, Doug West writes the sickest math books. Oh, God, like his introduction to graph theory.
Awesome.
With that,
last quick comment for people who like the show and want to have comments. We have a Gmail, whywelikeit at gmail.com. We're happy to get your comments in addition to the YouTube comment field and any other format. Throwing paper airplanes and hoping that they get to our doorsteps.
We would love to be struck by those paper airplanes. So, without any further ado, I'm Sean Plott.
I'm Tristan Brand.
Thank you for watching Why We Like It, Episode 2. We'll see you next time, where we'll continue talking about stories from any medium and why we think it's awesome. Cheers!
See ya.